Folks, can I have the slides up? Welcome to the public library. Tell me if the sound's okay in the back. All right. One of the special places for me growing up here in Ann Arbor. I'm going to read some excerpts from a book called Running Around Town. It's about connectedness, something I have been thinking about over the past 5 years with the pandemic and times of isolation and loss. So let me get right into it. What I'm going to do tonight is 3 short excerpts, about 4 minutes each. They're going to tell you a little bit about 1810 Covington, which is here, 1963. And then I'm going to do 4 short essays, each about 9 minutes. And then I'll take some questions, and we can stay around. We got to be out. We got to start walking out of here at 10 to 8. And yeah. So let me get right into it. Here's from the introduction about what this book is about. My world focused on the southwest quadrant of the city and extended from our home in a modest, just-built Dickin neighborhood to downtown, the University of Michigan, where my father had a student chapel, smack dab in the middle of all the action. These essays capture some personal interactions with people I met during the time period, random interactions that were transformative. A girl at my first Slauson 7th grade party who suggested that, boy, you should really pay attention more to life. A boy who gave me clothing advice in the Fuller's Pool locker room. Man, you need to get yourself a Levi's jean jacket. The clerks at Discount Records who talked about the music. Listen to this, kid. And a clerk at Middle Earth store on campus who schemed with me on a subversive act, and we'll get to that in a minute. The librarians at this library, and the one who drove the bookmobile. Here is a book you might like. And there were more teachers who dangled extra credit for me for writing about the city. And importantly, a classmate who passed me a note in history class in junior year of high school and said we should go to college together. The note started, after due consideration. All right. These interactions had a cumulative effect on me. Sometimes they entirely changed the trajectory of my life. They touch on various obsessions of mine over time. Mathematics, some of you will remember that. Long distance running, excellent handwriting, not mine. Current events, and the 3 basics of life for me in those days: baked goods, basketball, and books. And these essays weave in the theme of running. I was in a hurry during these chaotic times. I ran first out of fear, and I'll get to that. Later as a way to keep from exploding as a teenager, and then a way to channel a serious need to compete in high school, and gradually also as a way to watch my town. Finally, it was the music that held the 1960s and 70s together. You all know that. I observed these decades with a backdrop of music, folk, rock, soul, and jazz. Initially from a small white transistor radio, then an old red 45 player, then a used brown stereo from the Treasure Mart. Today, just hearing a beat or some words of a song can bring me back clearly to an event, a snippet of conversation, a trauma, or a kind word. Music of those times pulsated through Ann Arbor and facilitate the memories of the days I ran around this town when the promise of Ann Arbor seemed endless. That's from chapter 1. Let's think about a moment about this endless promise of Ann Arbor. How many of you came to Ann Arbor in the 1960s? All right. Think about this for a minute. Between 1960 and 1970, the population of Ann Arbor went from 66,000 to 100,000. 33,000 people came in one decade, a 50% increase. Think about that again. Compare this with the 25,000 that came the next 54 years. People always complain about more people coming to Ann Arbor. The 60s was the most ever. And the Postema family arrived in 1963 and was part of this massive influx. Here's from chapter 1, our home at 1810 Covington, where Emily now lives. Another central place in the house was my father's study, a lair of learning with books in every language, including Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and Dutch. Like most of Ann Arbor, education was a primary focus. Following a pattern familiar in America, two of my grandparents completed 8th grade, one 10th grade, and one high school, and yet all of them were readers. And the next generation went to college. My father was a Fulbright scholar in Amsterdam for 3 years, and he had been encouraged in this venture by a powerful man out of Grand Rapids who I followed closely over the years. In my father's desk was a letter dated April 25th from a U of M graduate. Michigan Congressman Gerald Ford sent my father a note. May I congratulate you on this Fulbright and wish you every success in the Netherlands. If there is anything I can do to help you, please feel free to contact me anytime. And I took that letter to mean our whole family. and in fact, in 1975, I was contemplating getting a pardon for someone, not myself, but I remembered this note. Now, my father's study eventually held several thousand books, and that was a place of learning. A burgundy leather chair sat in the corner. It was a great chair to read in, and you could feel smarter just sitting in it, but I was also where we had to sit, where we were in trouble and had to reflect upon some transgression or other. And there were many transgressions in my case, and since I'm among friends and many of them know about them, I might as well just confess up front that these transgressions arose because I simply didn't fully appreciate the laws related to trespass on property. Sorry, Judge. I believed that the city, the schools, and the U of M buildings were public property, and I believed that they were seriously underutilized, particularly after hours. Now, the various authorities in this city clearly saw it differently, and even though this was pointed out by the authorities, it didn't quite stick. In my young mind, what was the point of saying on Sundays, forgive us our trespasses, if you had not actually trespassed during the week? That was another reason for my explorations. I compiled a list of trespasses to confess each week and receive forgiveness for. So one might say this was an immature view of theology, but it worked for me for a while, well, for about a decade. So in short, I had to sit in the chair a lot, and this was quite fine with me, except for one detail. On the wall near this chair was a 1964 Time magazine cover of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. It was an iconic cover. Many of you have probably seen it. My father was an ardent admirer and went to hear him in Washington, D.C. When he came home from that, he added another picture of Reverend King, one with piercing eyes and a soulful look with the caption, "What are you doing with your life?" Now, I could disappoint my parents, I could disappoint my teachers and principals, I did, and I could disappoint the policeman next door, and that's a whole other story. But having to sit in that chair and face the Reverend King was exceedingly difficult and transformative. Dr. King looked over me in the 1960s and 70s in that chair on Covington Boulevard. He was a major influence. No matter where I looked from the chair, his eyes were upon me, urging a more purposeful life and sense of priorities. That's from chapter 2. Now, why did I run so much, running around town? I said in the introduction that I first ran out of fear, so I'll explain that in a chapter that involved moving for a year to Berkeley, California, for a sabbatical for my father in 69-70. Think about that for a minute. And how many of you knew about the helping hand signs in the 60s and 70s in Ann Arbor? Okay, well, this is from chapter 1, the year away. Running was second nature to me, and it arose out of fear. While our new neighborhood seemed child-friendly and idyllic, I was disturbed for several years when I was young. Many houses in our subdivision in Ann Arbor had blue helping hands in the window. As explained to me in kindergarten in 1964, these houses were places of refuge for kids who encountered trouble away from their own homes. Okay, I was not listening very well, and I believed that houses with these signs were themselves places of danger, and I ran past each of them, and there were a lot of them. When I finally was instructed again that these were good houses that would take you in, well, I was a suspicious child, and because there were so many of these signs in the neighborhood, my young mind just assumed the Dickens School area where we lived was saturated with predators. Or why would we need so many places of refuge? Now, the signs themselves were menacing, so I ran, and over time I got clarification of the situation. We lived in a safe neighborhood, and the moms were great. They were home and put these signs up. But by then, I was just in the habit of running everywhere. And the running proved useful when we moved to California for this sabbatical year. 2 nights into the trip, yes, June 1969. We left on June 16th, and some of you history buffs will know. My father called back to Ann Arbor and found out that the city was in the midst of what would become the largest student protest in the history of the city, 4 days worth. As we headed down the highway, my mom worried about the chaos and wondered aloud whether in the coming year, Berkeley would be a little more peaceful than Ann Arbor. Now, we arrived in Berkeley 2 months later. Yes, we did take a 5,000-mile detour to Cuernavaca, Mexico first, and we arrived in a station wagon, a pop-up camper, 4 bedraggled kids, and we looked like we were about to join a commune of some sort. Now, my father had neglected to get housing for us, and he found a place to park the camper off a busy street right near campus in a parking lot converted to temporary camping for people living on the street. It would be like setting up a campsite in Ann Arbor on the concrete pavement of the former empty budget rent-a-car place on Division in Washington near the University of Michigan. Nevertheless, when I stumbled out of the camper and surveyed the street action in Berkeley one morning, the upbeat, you'll know this song, recent hit song, The Age of Aquarius, Let the Sunshine In by the Fifth Dimension came on. But living with a street view of the day-to-day life in the Age of Aquarius, I'm telling you, was not ideal. When I went to get my mom a newspaper in the morning, the headlines reported that there was someone called the Zodiac serial killer on the loose in the Bay Area. The paper also had further detailed of the Charles Manson cult in Southern California that was moving north. I debated seriously whether to tell my mom that they were out of papers. I knew my mom would not take this very well, particularly because this little lock on the camper was now broken. But I handed the paper over and watched her absorb this information, and coincidentally, that very afternoon, my parents found a house in Richmond about 8 miles from Berkeley. Before school each day, my brother right here reminded me that the Zodiac man might be in the neighborhood. So I ran to school. The first week of school in Richmond, at 10 years old and in 5th grade, I found myself surrounded on the way home by a group of kids who demanded to know why I was in their territory and where I was from. Well, I did what so many from Michigan would do. I raised my right hand with the fingers closed together so it looked like the state of Michigan. I'm from Ann Arbor, Michigan, I said, as I pointed the approximate location. Now, a little context for them about what the hand map concept was might have worked better. The group looked entirely puzzled. In hindsight, my repeated jabbing of my finger, maybe this finger, maybe another finger, might have been taken as a sign of some sort of gesture of disrespect or a Michigan gang symbol. They took offense, derision followed, then hostility. I told them I come from a peace-loving family, and I showed them a silver peace ring. This made what matters worse. One pulled a knife, actually, and demanded the ring, and I fled. And I found that all my years of running had prepared me for this very moment. But all I could remember thinking as I ran home was, why were there no blue helping hands here in this state of Michigan? So here's an example of a full chapter. How many of you ever went to Middle Earth on South U or the other locations? All right, so you know what they sold there. Now, how many of you around 12 years old realized that you simply could not provide full information to your parents. It was too worrisome. You didn't want to worry them. All right, shot in the dark here. Anyone work at Middle Earth and sell a piece of jewelry to a 12-year-old boy in May of 1971? Okay. Well, that's what this next essay is about. Chapter 15, Middle Earth and the Peace Sign Necklace. This, by the way, you're getting a preview. The Ann Arbor Observer is going to put it in my town in November or December issue, right around Thanksgiving. So anyways, one Saturday in May, I was on a particular mission to buy a silver peace sign necklace. I looked carefully at the young woman with the wire-rimmed glasses behind the counter. I was in the store Middle Earth in the heart of the campus, a college student, a clerk with frizzy hair, a macrame belt, large hoop earrings, and a choker-style necklace. She looked a little like the Janis Joplin picture next to the cash register and was wearing a T-shirt with the word revolt overlaying a picture of a clenched fist. This was exactly the person who could help me. The store sold everything a countercultural student would want, a wide range of drug paraphernalia. You all knew that. Political buttons, books, beads, cards, candles, and jewelry. The strong scent of incense made my head pound. As a kid, because of the open display of drugs, it felt vaguely criminal to even be in this store. But it was so psychedelic and cool, and I liked to look at the large selection of black light posters. I think some of you may have had those. I was looking at a picture of Janis Joplin near the counter, and the woman asked me if I knew who she was. Of course I did. Everybody does. She died last year of drugs. The woman said she had heard her 2 years ago when she came to Ann Arbor to sing at Chrysler Arena. Did she play Piece of My Heart, I asked. She said no and inquired how I knew about that song and whether I knew that Joplin went by the nickname Pearl. I nodded. A person over at Discount Records. They're very helpful. They told me, I explained. Now, they had a lot of peace sign necklaces, so she even had more questions for me. No, it was not for my sister. Sorry, Carol. I told her it was for a classmate who sat next to me in the back of class. It was a graduation present from 6th grade. The clerk asked what sort of statement I wanted to make here with this purchase. I said, I don't know what you're talking about. I just wanted to get a necklace because I thought she would like it. She then pressed me on a number of things that I felt were a little personal, but for some reason I didn't mind telling her, and then she repeated back what I said to her in a very official-sounding way. So, you go to a church school, you pass notes to each other in the back row of class, all right, and you talk to each other sometimes about math. Now, this girl, she sits very straight in her chair. Good to notice these things. And she laughed at some con you played on a substitute teacher last week, and she likes that peace ring sign you wear. Hell yes, she said. Makes perfect sense to me about you getting her this necklace, she concluded. And when she summarized it like this, with a curse word thrown in, it was clear to me that I was doing the right thing. I told her to pick out a necklace that she thought would be best. I have a lot of money, I said. I have many jobs. She found exactly the one that fit this situation, and she put it in a fancy-looking box, and then she said that she would give me a partial discount for a good cause. Now, I debated while biking home whether to even show it to my mom. You know what's coming here. I assumed that she would think it was a nice gesture and I was generous, but when she examined it closely, unfortunately, the price tag was still on it. My mother expressed serious concern that it was just too extravagant a gift. She patiently explained that this was a type of gift that you would really give to someone when you were a lot older. And having been born in the Depression, my mom just shook her head again at the price. I less patiently explained that this was my money. I could do whatever I wanted with it. Hard-earned money, I reminded her, paper out, lawn mowing business, snow shoveling, and janitorial work. We'll talk about that later. And then, when I thought would be the clincher, I told her about the discounted price. My mom remained resolute. Now, she recommended that I go back to the store, listen carefully, to reconsider things. So, to appease her, I went back to Middle Earth and bought a much cheaper and wild blacklight poster I saw the same sales clerk, and I told her I was going to give that to my classmate, the black light poster. I told her what had happened with my mom and what I planned to do about it. She looked at me and smiled. Subversive, she said. You have to do what you have to do, she added, that clenched fist on her shirt giving her a full air of authority. And as I was leaving, she asked whether I was considering stealing the book placed by the door. I looked at it. It was the student radical Abby Hoffman's new book, famously titled, Steal This Book. She said she didn't care if I stole it, that the store had actually budgeted for the thefts of the book. But while I was ready to engage in the sin of omission that I was carefully planning for when I got home with my mom, a sin of commission, the theft of a book was a little too much for me that same afternoon. I told her that honestly, I wouldn't want to steal a book that I did not have time to read. It wouldn't be very respectful, and I had limited time as I was very busy. 6th grade was proving a lot of work. Peace, she said as I walked out into the fresh air. I showed the black light poster to my mom, and my brother laughed. Do you even know if this girl even has a black light? I had to admit that I had not considered this. My mom thought it was perfectly appropriate gift. She didn't look very carefully at it, I have to say. But importantly, this is important, my mom never asked me about the necklace. Now, the necklace was still in the box, and the box was still in my pocket. The lesson I learned that day was that it was important at times to provide only a certain amount of information to parents. Limited information was really in their best interest, I reasoned, and after all, my mother had said it herself many times, sometimes it is best to say nothing at all. I certainly thought that this was one of those times. Finally, the future lawyer in me thought, my mom had only asked me to reconsider things, and I had certainly done exactly what she wanted. Upon reconsideration, in Middle-earth that afternoon, I thought it best to let my mom feel good about her advice and the black light poster gift. And on further reconsideration, it was equally important not to have her worry about this necklace at all. In any event, I had some other things to plan for. My parents had let me invite 6 friends to a postponed birthday party at Bimbo's Pizza Parlor downtown, a popular spot, had a Dixieland band, shelled peanuts, and unlimited amounts of the elixir of life at that time, Faygo Red Pop. It was the furthest, that store was Bimbo's was the furthest thing possible conceptually from Middle-earth. I invited 5 of my longtime friends and also the classmate to whom I had given both the black light poster and the peace sign necklace. Well, she strolled into Bimbo's wearing a white dress and a red bow, and you know what's coming here. And when I saw that she was wearing that necklace, I snorted the red pop through my nose in a very unsightly way. And I was trying to control this. I gripped the edge of the table that had a lot of peanut shell residue. And so while trying to take care of this whole mess, I waved to her with a hand that was now covered with an unholy mixture of pop, snot, and peanut grime. Now, the girl came over to sit next to me, and with my mom on the other side of her, and when she saw my hand, as I raised it to whisper to her, she moved even closer to my mom. I was trying to whisper to her not to tell my mom that I had given the necklace to her. But with the Dixieland band playing loudly, she evidently thought I had asked her to do just the opposite. So there, I heard her telling my mom all about the necklace and the black light poster, and they were chatting away, and I was spending time with other friends, and she was telling her in detail about how much she liked this necklace as we ate pizza. Well, after the party and after dropping her and another friend off, I waited for my mom to say something all the long ride home in the car. Nothing down Main Street, nothing down unlit Scioto Church, nothing to Covington. At home, I looked right at her and thanked her for the party. She said, I really had a nice time talking to your friends. She smiled and said nothing, absolutely nothing, about the necklace or my act of omission. For my 12th birthday, my mom let it slide. She just let it slide. And the next time I was in Middle-earth, I told the student about the party, the red pop, my hand, the girl walking in with her necklace, and I told her about my mother's unadulterated grace. Crazy, she said, and she pointed to the picture of Janis Joplin on the counter. She touched me on the arm and laughingly proclaimed, I'm telling you, Pearl would have gotten a real kick out of all of this. So, anyways. I did note one thing. Afterwards, my mother was much more precise about things. Directions, instructions, and but anyways, I appreciated her, and I asked her about it. She's in Glacier Hills. I read that story to her, and she said, well, maybe I just changed my mind because I had a nice time talking to this girl. So that was probably really my mom. And now, another icon. How many of you have gone to hear music at the Ark downtown? All right, good show. How many of you went to the Ark in its first venture on Hill Street? Okay. How many of you have read the Michigan Daily Review of the Ark in 1966? Okay, well, I don't want you to say anything. This is a merger of two chapters, one called The Ark and the other called Cleaning the Chapel Basement. You recall my father was a pastor at the chapel downtown. During these times of turmoil in the 60s, my father took solace and put energy into a folk music venue, coffee house that was called The Ark. My father had a vision for this type of venue in his basement of his chapel, but in 1965 he joined with 3 other pastors, all Presbyterians, down the road, and they had a house on Hill Street. Let's get to that a minute. Oh, shoot, I didn't put this up for Middle Earth. Okay. Yeah. It's sort of hazy, as South U always seemed to be then. And so here's the old house on Hill Street. Now, my father had been rebuffed by the Episcopalians, who had formed another venture called Canterbury House, and they put on some serious, they brought Neil Young here. They actually brought Janis Joplin to Chrysler Arena. So those Episcopalians, you got to hand it to them. They do have money, and they can do this. So while the Ark focused on folk blues and bluegrass, music of every type was everywhere in Ann Arbor during this time. But as to the Ark, my father came home from one of the planning meetings in late '65, and he told the family about it at the dinner table. He told us 2 other names had been considered, the Fish and Oikos, which is now a yogurt as far as I can tell, the latter of which meant house in Greek. Now, we told my dad that no one would want to go to a place for music called the Fish, or some Greek word that meant something else. So my father had suggested the name Ark from the biblical tale of Noah, a place of shelter in the storm of the times. We told him we liked the name, so we were happy to find out it was adopted by consensus in December 1965. Well, then we wanted to know what folk music was, and he sat us down. We listened to Blowin' in the Wind by Bob Dylan and songs by Pete Seeger and Joan Baez and other words. Blowin' in the Wind, by the way, was written in April of 1962, 1 week before he came to play at Ann Arbor High down here. I don't know if he played it. It was still in the works, but I found that interesting. Now, I became obsessed with this song and by many versions of Blowin' in the Wind, including one of the best versions ever by the great Sam Cooke, and so the overlap to gospel. The song had a similar effect of Martin Luther King's eyes looking at me in my father's study. It was a rhetorical call to purpose and was hard to avoid. For a song that was written by Dylan in 10 minutes, evidently, in 1962, it sure had staying power, and the clerks at Discount Records who knew I liked the song, they would find a different, endless versions for me every time I went to the store, and my personal favorite, you should listen to this, was the version by Stevie Wonder, 16 years old, 1966. It's fabulous. So we went to the Ark and listened for some of the music of the day, and it was a balm for the time, or so it seemed. When the Ark just opened, my father came home agitated in early '66. He was carrying a copy of the Michigan Daily that complained about a recent review of the Ark by a student reporter, Joyce Nowitzki. The headline, "The Ark, Divine inspiration lacking, said it all. Those are fighting words. It continued, the Ark, a new coffee house, is only another two-bit enterprise, bound to be beached. This place has too little and will bomb out, won't even last 40 days and 40 nights. The reporter then wrote about the no-drug policy at the Ark. I didn't mind checking my pot and LSD, but for what? Squirt, orange drink, and Coke? The student writer wrote that the Ark needed to pick up the tempo, add a little less lust to its menu, all right, and start swinging with live music. Now, she must have taken all of her drugs before she went into the Ark to do this review, as she seemed to have even missed the entire musical performance of the group, the Spike Drivers, that had played that very night, as the manager wrote in a rebuttal to the Michigan Daily. The writer also took a mean swipe at Joan Baez and complained of her incessant wailing. Now, when I heard that, even at 6 years old, I knew that this was pure heresy, as Joan Baez was like an angel to me at that time. Now, despite the review, the founders were even more resolved in its mission, and they were correct. It eventually thrived beyond their wildest dreams, and when the churches could no longer support it in 1960, they raised their own money, and it became one of the premier music venues in the United States. You all know that. And while my father's dream of having a music venue in the basement of his chapel had to adapt to this new venue, he did have make another plan for the chapel basement, and this involved my brother who's here and myself. When the chapel began to house young people who were living on the streets of Ann Arbor, they were young people. They might have dropped out of college, might have been kicked out of their home. They were also young people who traveled a circuit through Cambridge, through Boulder, Madison, and Berkeley. And they might have been messed up on drugs. They might have been disillusioned at the state of society. There were also some recent Vietnam vets, and they all needed a place to stay. And because of this, the chapel needed to be cleaned more, so my dad enlisted my brother primarily, and then I helped him to clean the chapel on Saturday morning. And we had to rouse all of the people who were living there, and we had to do it at 9 a.m. And it involved also laying down the law for Saturday and Sunday behavior so the chapel would be clean for Sunday. No smoking, no drinking, no drugs, no swearing. My brother was 14 and I was 12 when we were put in charge of cleaning and enforcement effort, likely a violation of child labor laws. Now, but I got to know many of the people, and I was able to hear their stories and talk to them, and I like to talk to them about music. Many of them had guitars and liked to sing on the chapel lawn, and I was convinced that no matter what their turmoil, one of them could be the next Janis Joplin or Jimi Hendrix. While my father dropped us off, he often had other things to do, but while we often invoked my dad's name in tense situations, and there were many, he wasn't often around to back us up, but I was witness one time to my father's own skill in diffusing difficult situations. A person was causing a lot of trouble in the basement. Well, he was threatening to burn down the chapel one Saturday afternoon while we were there working. Now, given that the chapel was mainly large limestone blocks, this seemed very unlikely to me, yet he was wild-eyed and looked dangerous. My father came downstairs to see what the commotion was all about. The wild-eyed arsonist seemed angry at everybody in the world, and he was going to take it out on the chapel. The man then picked up a ping pong paddle from the ping pong table in the basement. My father seemed calm and unconcerned with the hysterics and suggested that they play some ping pong before he burned down the chapel. My brother and I just looked at each other. My father was a peaceful man, and I was not so peaceful. So I was thinking of getting a blunt instrument from the janitorial closet to use as needed. The man said he would play, and that if my father lost, he would burn down the chapel, but if my father won, he would burn down the chapel. Well, despite this problematic scenario and the arsonist's demeanor, my father picked up a paddle. The arsonist could play some ping pong, but he was simply no match for my father. It was it was good versus evil in my view, a battle for a man's soul, and the white ball, it was like a little round bit of soul that was being struggled over back and forth. But I began to realize that my father was keeping the score so close and was neither going to let him win or lose. This tie scenario went on, and the arsonist finally threw down his paddle and said he was sick of the game. But the back and forth eventually wore the anger out of him, or perhaps the drugs were wearing off. He even thanked my father for playing with him, and he left. And he did not come back to burn the chapel down. In fact, we never saw him again, a nameless person who was traveling through, stopping long enough to play ping pong with my father. Saturday mornings in the early 1970s for my brother and myself, I was able to help my brother put things back in order. This cleaning ritual brought comfort, and I liked to use the very harsh chemicals and polish the brown tile floor with a very hazardous buffing machine. Alone, which made my brother laugh, by the way. Alone upstairs in the sanctuary there, I liked to make sure that the hymnals were in their proper order in the pews, and in the solitude with the light going through, hold on, there we go, light going through the stained glass windows, I could hum the hymns of the ages, which I had been taught, all the verses. But what I also did was sing all of the passionate songs of the day. Now, these really lifted my spirits, and the music of the 60s and 70s became sanctified and eternal tones to me there. That's the 60s and 70s. So, moving up to 75, people actually asked me how I got interested in law. The real answer was, I met some nice law students when I was on law school property after hours. How many of you believed at 16 you could pass yourself off as 25? Well, that is what the next piece is about. Chapter 33, November 1975, crashing a law school dance. Junior year at Pioneer, cross-country season was over. My top song for the season started with a stunning guitar riff and then a really strong beat. Up Around the Bend by Creedence Clearwater Revival. Go and listen to that. If any song could capture the passion of running cross-country, this was it. There's a place up ahead and I'm going, just as fast as my feet can fly. Come on the rising wind, we're going up around the bend. It was a perfect song that carried us, coach, to a very successful season. Basketball practice would start soon, and my coach did not like me to run basketball, but this would help me refocus. And this was also the time that I was facing the abstractions of calculus, which I loved. But my brother was not here to help me now. And this was a worthy pursuit. Calculus was about rates of change and forced me to consider the infinite every day. And Ann Arbor had the perfect laboratory to view change and infinite possibility, the U of M campus. November was the perfect time to roam around on a weekend with my best friend from the basketball team. We headed to the U of M Law School. We spotted a glow and activity from inside the beautiful curved window of the Lawyers Club. The sign at the door said Law Student Dance Party, no undergrads. Now, this looked very promising to my friend. We were not college undergrads, he reasoned. So obviously we were permitted to enter. I often deferred to my friend, Ben Sloat, for all of you who are here, in part because he was impressed. I was impressed that he took Latin. But I believe that law students reasonably might also be a requirement. Now, I finally rationalized to myself that what the sign really wanted was those who were students of law, but I further reasoned that one could be a student of law in the broader sense by simply being a person interested in the law. The problem with this rationalization, which was clever, was that I didn't meet my own constructed definition of it, as I had never really been that interested in the law at that time. But I felt I could remedy the situation by reading up a little bit on the law before I went to the party. I was going to prepare for this party. And I'd become interested in that law, in that time in the law library. So I told my friend I'd meet him inside later after I went to the law library to read some law to prepare for this party. Now, he was going straight in, confident he would gain entry with his gift of gab, and he did have a gift of gab, but he knew me well enough to be tolerant tolerant of my rationalizing and other quirks. I went to the library and immediately took a law book off the shelf to consult. It was volume 400 of the Federal Supplement, which I would learn contained federal district court opinions from across the country. I then flipped around and landed on a case called the American East India Corporation versus Ideal Shoe Company. The title made me laugh, but it turned out to be a rather dry contract case, difficult to understand. But I did pick up some legal terms that I thought might be very used to throw around at this party. Secured transactions, trover, which I liked, and conversion. Well, I flipped to the middle of the volume, and another case really caught my eye. The United States of America versus miscellaneous pornographic magazines. Now, being 16, it actually was the term miscellaneous that really set me laughing out loud. And how could I forget the first line of the case? The government has brought this case in order to destroy 3 magazines and a deck of cards. Now, this seemed like a lot of federal effort. So I read on. The judge was quite agitated that these materials violated community standards, and I did, in fact, I will tell you, go to the end of the opinion to see if for any reason some of this obscenity was attached as an exhibit, just to fully understand the legal contours of this case. Now, nothing was attached, but having briefed myself on contract law and criminal obscenity standards, I felt well prepared to seek entrance to the persons interested in law dance party, as I had mentally renamed it. But I was so focused on gaining entry to the dance that I walked out of the library still carrying volume 400 of the Federal Supplement. I realized that I had the book as the monitor of the party and waved me through while eyeing the book. My friend wasn't in the crowded dining area of the party where I managed to snag a can of Werner's. I found my friend in the Lawyers Club, a beautiful room with tapestries, wood panels, high-back chairs, and portraits of stern lawyers on the wall. He was sitting with 3 women law students, chatting away. Laughingly, he asked how my studies were going. I held up. Well, that's the law school. So I held up volume 400. I felt compelled at that moment to really be honest and state the obvious to these women law students. I'm not actually enrolled in the law school, I said. We know that, responded one of the women. Then she softened the blow. Well, no actual law student would bring a volume of the Federal Supplement to a party. They laughed, but I appreciated the inside information. A woman from New York, wearing a black turtleneck sweater, began to cross-examine me in a friendly way. Is it true that you and your friend, both minors, came here to meet new people, that you did not come here to drink beer as you both have Werner's? Did you, in fact, as your friends intimated, feel obligated to learn some amount of law to justify your attendance at this law school party? I answered in the affirmative to all of these. She continued, would you young men agree that since you actually made it into this party, you both should actually dance with us a while so you have something interesting to say about the party back at school? Now, I appreciated the utter directness and practicality of her suggestion, her lack of condensation, her lack of condensation, and her use of the term young men. As we moved to the dance floor, she also gently suggested that I might want to set volume 400 down now on the couch. Now, these were some smart women, and that was certainly made good sense to me. In the Lawyers Club lounge near the curved alcove, my friend and I danced to Motown music with 3 law students who were willing to show us more than just tolerance. At that moment, we felt like we belonged at this dance party, and in the dimly lit room, we danced to Motown music, Dancing in the Street by Martha Reeves, Ain't No Mountain High Enough by Marvin Gaye, and Stop in the Name of Love by the Supremes. So we danced to the music with the law students in the beautiful venue, and we felt older and wiser. We sat down with our new friend, and our new friends told us about the pressures of law school life and how they came to this party to get away from the law. But I wanted to stop them there. But before we turned from the law, I wanted them to explain to me those legal terms from the Ideal Shoe Company case: secured transactions, trover, and conversion. This knowledge oddly added to my appreciation of the night, and I began to think about the law. I didn't think asking them about the pornography case was a particularly good idea, so instead I asked whether they knew that Verner's actually originated in Detroit. After that, it seemed like a pretty good time for us to go. My friend and I lingered outside the law school after I brought volume 400 back, discussing how we might actually describe this night. CCR was playing, there's a place up ahead, and I'm going. We were on a bench near the walls of the law school's warm tan and beige Indiana limestone, which had absorbed over a half century of discussions, explanations, and justifications. And on that night, housed a dance party where 3 surprisingly sympathetic law students welcomed me into the fellowship of persons interested in the law. So one more, this is a little shorter. How many of you were in a high school musical play? I'll just say that there is a lot of action going on in high school musical theater. Am I right? Well, I lucked into a great musical partner that year. Chapter 35, April 1976. 11th grade, I was assigned to a classmate, a book lover, in the high school musical as a singing and dancing partner. Overall, the school play required to hold hands, sit close to each other. I'm not joking about this. Sit close to each other and sing to each other and dance together some elaborate choreography piece for hours a day at rehearsal for 3 months, all for academic credit. At the cast party after the last play, just outside the dance area and outside the building, my dance partner and I were talking about the play. Stevie Wonder's Signed, Sealed, and Delivered, I'm Yours was playing on the inside. With the gigantic moon overhead, she asked me what I was going to do now with my free time since the play was over. Despite time freezing, despite the leading question as large as the moon itself, despite the words of Stevie Wonder as bright as a neon sign, I managed to reply. My managed to reply was just that I needed now to catch up on my calculus homework. Now, this memorable scene replayed over and over in my mind when I got home and for the next week. An annoying realization of miscalculation crept over my entire being. Calculus homework was simply not the right answer here, and not the response that my classmate was seeking. So I recalibrated the next week. I suggested to her after class one day that perhaps, if she was not doing anything more interesting, she'd like to see the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Jack Nicholson. And I added as a clincher to compare the book to the movie. She was a bibliophile, after all. Now, the movie had gotten great reviews with one noted adult themes, strong language, and brief nudity, rated R. All right, at 16, this seems perfectly appropriate for a first date. I was technically underage, as you had to be 17 unless you were with your parents. However, the movie was at the campus theater, so I assumed that no one, and I mean no one, would ever check an ID there, and my threshold concern faded quickly. I drove our old car, a 1965 Ford Fairlane two-door that had a large front seat. Someone gave it to our family, and it could no longer go in reverse. Admittedly, a crucial function. It had to be driven and parked with great foresight, but rather than fix the car, my parents evidently thought that driving under these circumstances would make us cautious and very strategic drivers. But the car had a good radio, and Bob Seger accompanied me on the way, then Stevie Wonder, then Van Morrison. I was humming Brown-Eyed Girl as I knocked on the big red door at her house on Copley near Tappan. My classmate's father, a U of M law professor, answered the door, invited me in, and chatted with me, and things were going very well as far as I could tell, until he cross-examined me on whether I thought, given the reviews, that we could even get into this movie. Well, time crystallized. I suspected that I might be in some sort of legal trap by this question. I surmised that her father had read the reviews and the rating and realized I was underage. Perhaps he was going to suggest an alternative to an adult-themed, strong language-filled, and brief nudity-containing movie. Or it might be worse. The following concerns crept into my mind, yet oddly sparked a further interest in law at that exact moment. Was going to underage to an R-rated movie actually a crime? And did the use of a car to engage in this activity somehow heighten the criminal activity? John, Judge, local version of the Mann Act, I don't know. Did a law professor have a special legal duty to report any act of social malfeasance to the police? I looked down at my feet to collect my thoughts, and I noticed that the green stripes of my Adidas running shoe were unattached and were curling upwards. I felt that I was coming apart at the seams from the shoes on up. But at the same time, this is what I thought. This is how the 17-year-old mind works. I thought that what I really needed, 16, I thought what I was really needed was to simply provide this law professor with a much more legalistic defense of our planned outing. What came out of my mouth next was a jumble of sentence fragments, and likely not even in this order. Sir, important book, read an article in a magazine in the dentist office about movie ratings. Merely an industry standard. Not criminal, not enforced. I'm almost 17. Professor Cunningham, I love the law. The moment was surreal as there was a mirror in the hallway, and out of the corner of my eye, I actually observed myself delivering these excited utterances. Old school, erudite, and taciturn, Professor Cunningham, an expert on property administrative and regulatory law, who truly was wearing a sport coat and vest on an ordinary Saturday night at home, was clearly unable to decipher or even fathom my jibber-jabber. Now, taking pity on me and in a dignified way, he clarified that he had recently read that the movie had won many awards and that he was merely suggesting that it might be crowded in the theater and thus hard to get into that night. Okay, a valuable lesson was learned then and there about listening very closely to a question before ever answering. Now, fortunately, my classmate came down the stairs and then was wearing a new white painter pants obtained that morning from Sam's store downtown, and she was wearing a paisley blouse that she had made. She gracefully escorted me out the door before I could say one more word to her father, except good night, and really, what else could I possibly have said at that moment? Confessed that I was about to drive his youngest daughter in a defective car? So we then watched the movie in the cramped theater and cheered Chief Bromden's escape from the mental institution at the end. And after the movie, we went to the Lamplighter restaurant on Liberty, a popular spot frequented by U of M athletes. I had carrot cake and milk, and she had rice pudding, it was very good, and a Coke. She did, in fact, note some differences between the book and the movie. My classmate wondered, though, whether she had heard correctly from me upstairs at her house that I had told her father that I loved the law. Well, I told her I wasn't sure exactly what I told him because I was actually completely lost focus as I was watching myself in a mirror that had a crack in it, and it was distorted, talking to him. Well, do you know anything about the law, she asked. Well, I said that, in fact, I had been doing some significant legal research in the law library just that past fall. I kept going, volume 400 of the Federal Supplement, to be precise. I know a lot, a great deal actually, about secured transactions, trover, conversion, and criminal obscenity law. Well, that is a little strange, she said. But definitely tell my father about this the next time we go out. Well, we walked through the streets of Ann Arbor to my carefully parked car by the Diag. As we drew closer, I noticed that the police and a tow truck were near where I had parked the car. They were in the process of towing away a car that had illegally parked in front of mine, having wedged it in. I could not believe my good fortune. With her words, next time, still sinking in, a fine mist and the palpable press of spring embraced us. As she took my hand, the reality and unreality of that moment merged. At that instant, at 16 years old, the city of Ann Arbor and the future both seemed to provide profound promise. And like my car, we could only move forward. So Emily, one more minute. I told you I'd be on time here. You've been a great audience, and it's been my pleasure to read for you. As an aside, my daughter often teased me about her mom, my late wife. She said, "You married the classmate at Pioneer High School assigned to you as a musical partner." Well, I told her, of course I did. And I'm very grateful to the Ann Arbor Public Schools musical program for that. Anyways, these are some excerpts of essays from my book, Running Around Town. There will be about 40 essays. The book, as I said earlier, ultimately is about connectedness and gratitude, even though not everything went well for me during these years. But all of you here have these type of stories in your head or in your heart, and I recommend that listening to music to help bring them out. Maybe you will tell them to your friends or your families or your kids, and maybe you will write them down. Ultimately, these essays, while they are about the past, they are also about living in the present. And here are some words from Van Morrison that captures this from his great song, "These Are the Days of Endless Summer." I wish I could sing like him, but I can't. I only had 1 year in choir. They did not let me in the next year. These are the days now that we must savor and we must enjoy as we can. These are the days that will last forever. You've got to hold them in your heart. So go away tonight and remember what music brings back to you, those days or moments in Ann Arbor or elsewhere that will last forever and you will hold in your heart. Thank you very much for coming. This has really been a lot of fun. Thank you. Questions. My family is in the front row. You cannot ask them. They're here. You'd think they'd here for support. They're actually fact-checking this as we go. And so you can't ask them any questions. But I have some friends from all the way back from Slauson. One of my friends, we went to a concert earlier this year, and I said, "Kathy, you know, we've known each other 53 years, and we met in 7th grade, small house." And so I've got my best friend from junior high here from Missoula, Montana, and a lot of people from Pioneer. Got people I worked with at the city, and I've got people from church and neighborhood, and Ann Arbor's been very good to me. So any questions? I've been working on this for 5 years, and Emily's pushing me on this now. And
if folks do have questions, I am going to ask you to speak in a microphone because in addition to the full room tonight, we have people watching online, and they can only hear if it goes into a mic.
How about you just repeat the question?
When is this going to be out? I'm working with Emily. I would say probably by next Labor Day we're sort of shooting for, and so it's in the editing process. I still have some other things to work on. The process has taken a while. I've worked on it for 5 years, and it's only been about 30 pages per year now on the average, which is pretty slow. I could write a legal brief in one day, 30 pages, but this takes a long time, and I'm going to be editing, and that process. I'm trying to weave the themes that I talked about in the introduction throughout, and those themes certainly are on random interactions, but also just dealing with friends and trying to sort through what was actually going in Ann Arbor during that time. Because for one thing, there was no parental supervision in the 60s and 70s. I'll just say that straight out. I mean, when you're downtown, cleaning the chapel on Saturday morning with folks who are in desperate situations, and you're left in charge of this. I gave that chapter to my daughter, and she said, this really explains why you and Uncle Tom are like you are. I said, yeah, that's right. So it's going to be a while, but Emily's been great. And the other story about that again, I was in California, and I was actually, like I said, working on Chapter 2, 1810 Covington. I get an email from her, and she says, hi, I'm Emily. I've been assigned to work on your book. And by the way, I'd really like to see this done because I live at 1810 Covington. And I said, I was sort of stuck at that point, and I had a little writer's block, and I said, okay, that's a sign. I gotta get cracking on this. And I had promised my late wife I would finish it in 2024, and so we'll work hard on this. And so, if nothing else, I am a man of my word, and so I'm going to get that done. John, what about the trespassing? Yeah, I do have to say, and I don't condone this, but when you float in a pool at 3 o'clock in the morning and look at the sky, you'll think of Vet's pool much differently. It's quite an event. And the pools, Pioneer High School pool, you could ask this group where they were. There were a lot of places to go. Sandra.
The level of detail is so high, and I'm wondering if you have journals or writing or anything recording it that you're relying on, or if this is your memory. If your memory is that clear.
So, yeah, so the question she asked about the detail that I have in there. So whether I have journals and stuff. I had a fabulous 7th grade teacher who I talked about dangling extra credit. We were in small house, and she had us do journals. We could get extra credit for anything that we wrote. So if you went to a student riot, you could write it, and you could get extra credit. And man, I was all about it, extra credit. It was great to have. And so, but I also have, I've kept every letter that anybody's written to me over my whole life. So I have that, and shoot, I forgot to bring it. I have a letter from the classmate, for example, who I gave the peace sign necklace to me, written on beautiful flowered stationery. I got 2, one for the blacklight poster, one for the silver peace sign necklace. Said, Dear Steve, I really love it. Sorry I couldn't get you anything. It looks very expensive. So this has been a good year, and I don't know what else to say, but I'm trying to fill up all of the paper on this sheet of paper. So, and then she signed off on it. So I have those correspondence. I also, Ryan Stanton, who is here, I have an unusual bit of of trivia with some notes written on it. I have a 10th grade, or June of 1972, a letter from the school asking for $2 for a damaged math book. Okay, well that was all about the trying to get into the John Sinclair rally and unsuccessfully getting in. My book got trampled. I had to limp home, and I had to pay the $2. And in our family, there were certain sins, but damage to a book, that was so disrespectful. I had to pay it myself. My mom drove me down there. I had to apologize in the name of the Postema family for damaging this math book. And so I have that letter. And so I have many things like that. And so, but the other thing is, music really, for me, gives me great detail. And so if you listen to some songs, I won't put people on the spot, but look, you know what song you made out, you know who you were making out to when you heard Signed, Sealed, Delivered, or whatever. And so that, I think, is really helpful. Plus, well, my brother lives next door, 50 feet away. My sister lives a quarter mile down the road. My daughter lives next door. And we talk about the details of these things with my parents. Why did you do this? Why did you not get housing for us in Berkeley, California? So we had to live in a derelict area for a while. And so with that, we sort of, the things come back. But I do have a very good memory, and but I find that music helps. And once you start writing and you go through this memorabilia from the past, I have my report cards, and I have, why is the principal saying, he really needs to listen more in class and not talk as much, and so being first when you're done with her homework is not necessarily your best effort, and so you have these things, and it's like, oh yeah, this was a problem, and so those things are really, really helpful, and I have it categorized sort of by year and by everything. So I can go back to some song will bring me to 1969, and I'll bring out the stuff, and I'll look at it. Why is this buffalo chasing me in the Yosemite? And yeah, but the lack of parental supervision just made your mind much different than kids today. You always were scanning things and for trouble. And I have people I'm going to have so much fun. My friends from Slauson and Pioneer have been so helpful on this that I'm throwing if the city would give me my block permit, I'm throwing a. Well, it said I had to turn it in 10 days, and I turned it in 9. So really, so I'm throwing a party for my. I'm throwing a party for my high school class, and it's really a Facebook group, and there's people who are coming in, and so I just want to thank them all. They've been very supportive of me over the last year, and so this weekend. I'm going to see a lot of people from the past. And so once I talk to them, I know that, and some of them are here, once we sit down, they're going to ask, like, did you remember when we listened to Yellow Brick Road for the first time? Yeah, so those will all come back. But thank you from a writer. Yeah. I'll take one more question, then we'll go. Yeah.
Microphone right here.
Yeah.
Are you still running?
Yes. Yeah. My coach can verify that. I wouldn't call it running in the same way that it used to be, but I alternate jogging and walking. And the Pioneer High School track, I will tell you, is probably my favorite place in the city of Ann Arbor. And the coach even lets me. The sign says, you're not supposed to be there during during school hours, but you know, I was the captain, and so I get a little, you know, he's okay, and he lets me, and I jog on the outside lane. So that's been great, and I get into the other thing is, it was the early '70s, and we ran so far. I mean, we went out Knight Road, Tesmer Road, and it was all dirt roads back then, so I have no knees or hip problems from all this running. But we went forever, and then we were terrified because our coach had this yellow station wagon. He'd come out and he'd find what we were doing out there, and we'd see this cloud of dust, and then he would arrive in the yellow station wagon to find out why it was taking so long for us to get back, but we ran all out that side of town, but really everywhere, to the Arb, Huron High School, out Craig Road, Waters Road. We went everywhere, and the great thing about the cross-country team is, you know, you talk with people on it. It's a great sport. I threatened each of my children, if they didn't find a sport, they'd have to run on the cross-country team, and none of them did. They found other sports, and but it really gave me a chance to observe my town. In fact, I embarrassed to say I wrote my college essay on, you know, things I learned running around Ann Arbor. You know, a little prosaic, you know, I guess, but hey, it worked, and so. But that added to my intense observation of the town. So thank you for that. Take one more question. Yes.
I really enjoyed it. So plus I have a big brother. I feel like you and
Yep.
I wondered if you or your father had any direct experience with what some of the other things going on Hill Street with the Johnson Clare, Iggy Pop, and Rainbow.
Yeah. So I have something in there. I have a story. Part of the ARC story, actually, that I didn't do was, while my dad was dealing with all the music, what I was really interested in '68 and '69 was selling things on the Diag. You know, I was in Cub Scouts. You had to sell little screwdriver sets. You know, you're at Slauson. Eventually, you had to sell, you know, big horrible candy bars to go to camp, and you know, you found in the neighborhood there was just too many kids, and so it was saturated. But you go down to campus, you can sell things on the campus, and as far as the you know, across from the ARC was the Johnson Clare was the Rainbow People's, you know, the White Panther House on Hill Street, and yeah, I actually went to sell these little miniature screwdriver sets to the White Panther Party, and they, I mean, I sort of agreed with them. You know, they're telling me I'm really part of like an educate. You know, I'm being used by a corrupt system selling these things, and I'm telling you, they had a point. They had a point, and but I love to sell things on the Diag near someone who was playing, blowing in the wind on a guitar, and sometimes the best thing is they'd hand you money, and they didn't even want the product, and I found very quickly, I watched the signs, and urgency was effort. So gradually the sign was, help. I have to sell these today or I can't go to camp. Very, very successful. And people would give you money and they didn't take your product. And so then you had an ethical dilemma. How much of this money, you know, how much of this can I keep? And so I spent a lot of time sort of thinking, but that's where I bought. One day somebody gave me $20. I said, I'll give. Didn't want any of these screwdrivers, and I said, I'll give the school $10, but I'm taking $10. I'm going to Discount Records. I bought Stevie Wonder 45, Blowing in the Wind, and so it was really quite a great venture. And so yeah, I was over on Hill Street. Ironically, the White Panther Party house was across the street from the ARC, and so it was a solace at the time, but also their platform ushered in a lot of things with the Human Rights Party, and I have a friend whose father ran on the Human Rights Party who's here tonight, Phil Carroll, and so I have a thing about that, writing about that. So, yeah. Thanks a lot, folks. Yep.